All right, good morning, everybody. Rise and shine. Hope you're doing well so far. And thank you again for being at the meeting. Just taking a few minutes, and then we'll get started on today's article. Hey, Kelly. Good to see you. Good morning. Just a few of us for the moment. Hello. One more minute. Hey, Eva. Hey, Drew. How's it going? Hey, Center. Okay, guys, welcome back to class. Good morning. Thanks so much for being here as usual. So yeah, we have another pretty straightforward plan today. We're just continuing through the order of articles that are written in the syllabus. I think we're about one essay behind, so the dates don't exactly line up, but almost. Today the topic is going to be JJC Smart, sensations and brain processes. And then on Friday, we're going to talk about Alan Turing's article, Computing Machinery and Intelligence. So in the end, I think it's just one essay that has to be caught up on. And if we can catch up before the end of the semester, then we'll get all the stuff in. And if I have to, then I'll delete maybe an article or so at the end from the next topic. But we're still going to cover JJC Smart and Alan Turing this week. So that's the plan for now. So anyway, yeah, today, another important author on this subject that we've been working with. And this is the man's name, JJC Smart. Okay, JJC Smart. And he lived from 1920 until 2012. And the article that we're looking at from him today is called Sensations and Brain Processes. It's from 1959. Sensations and Brain Processes, JJC Smart. Mostly 20th century philosopher, and 1959, the paper, Sensations and Brain Processes. Okay, JJC Smart's a Scottish philosopher. He worked for most of his career in Australia, and he's written on a whole bunch of interesting subjects in philosophy, ethics, the philosophy of science, and metaphysics, and the philosophy of mind, of course. So, well-known and respected figure in recent contemporary philosophy. The philosophy world, I guess, in a way, is like a small world, and so there's a couple of degrees of separation actually between me and JJC Smart. I published a book where I co-edited it with another woman philosopher who's a couple generations older than me, and her name is Chandana Chakrabarty. She and her husband are very well known in the whole world of Indian philosophy and religion, so like the connection between Western philosophy and certain doctrines of Hinduism, and all these Eastern philosophical traditions too. Anyway, I worked on a book with her, and she's, like I told you, a couple generations older than me. When she was young and when she was in grad school, one of her advisors to her dissertation was J.J.C. Smart. So, anyway, I find his work quite interesting, but we're going to learn a little bit about what he thinks on this topic of physicalism versus dualism today. So just to remind you, the current debate is, what's the nature of consciousness? Is it just physical, or is it something that is not physical? If you are a physicalist, then you think everything in the universe is made out of matter, even the mind, even consciousness. So it's also just another physical phenomenon. And then dualism, of course, says no, there's matter, but there's also mind, and mind is not made out of anything physical. It's just something that doesn't have extension, and it's consciousness. Well, J.J.C. Smart is on the side of physicalism, so he's going to defend the physicalist position. In his view, the argument that he's making in the paper that is sort of his basic defense of physicalism is that he's trying to defend this statement, this claim, that sensations equal brain processes. So this like little equation, if you like, is his position that he's trying to argue for. So he's in defense of this statement. Sensations are equivalent to brain processes. Now, just a quick word about what the word sensations is meaning here. His usage of the term sensation just refers to any state of consciousness whatsoever, okay? So sensation, what is that? Okay, so a sensation is just any state of consciousness. Let me give you some random examples of what some of those are. One sensation is the sensation of watching a philosophy lecture. So you're going through that sensation right now. Another sensation is, I guess, teaching a lecture. I'm experiencing that, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, okay? Another sensation, riding a bike, having a nice taste of ice cream and experiencing the flavor of it. Having a dream, you know, when you're asleep and you have REM sleep and you're thinking of, you know, scenes and settings that are not really happening. Feeling fear, feeling anxiety, pain, you know, scraping your knee, falling off your bike, feeling a little ouch. All these things are different states of consciousness. So it's just different experiences, mental states that you can be in, okay? And the argument that he's making, once again, is just that all those things, all those different states of consciousness, what they really are is they are just states of the brain. They are brain processes. So what he says is, like, what is it, for example, for you to experience that nice flavor of ice cream? Well, it's just for your brain at that moment to be in a particular physical state. And because it's in that physical state, the condition of, you know, the neurons and synapses, et cetera, in your brain, that is what we call the experience, the sensation of the flavor of the taste, or the feeling of pain, or of pleasure, or of whatever, anxiety, having a dream, having a fantasy and imagination of any kind whatsoever. It's all just brain processes. So what he thinks is that if that is true, if sensations are just the same thing as brain processes, then that means physicalism is true. Because according to physicalism, everything's made out of matter, even your consciousness. Now, there's no dispute really about whether things that are not conscious are made out of matter. Nobody is looking at this table and is wondering, is this table got a soul, or is there something about it that's not physical? So basically, if even consciousness is just states of the physical brain, then that means that everything is physical, because consciousness is, and of course all the other stuff is as well. So that's his position, and let's see how he tries to make a case for it. And just one last thing here, sensations equal brain processes. When that equal sign is there, it means that these are two names for the same exact thing. It's not that there are two different things that are like related to each other. So it's like saying John is equal to my brother. So that's not two different people, John and my brother. It's just John is the name of the brother that I have. So that's two labels, but there's only one object. And the same thing he's saying is true here. Sensations and brain processes are not two different things that are somehow connected, like I have a sensation and there's also a brain process, and they're sort of linked. He's saying, no, it's even more fundamental than that. The sensation is the brain process. It's the same exact thing. So it's just the physical state of the brain. All right, and like I'll read here a little of his words on this. He says, when I say that a sensation is a brain process, I am using is in the strict sense of identity. Just as in this mathematical statement, 7 is identical with the smallest prime number greater than 5. When I say that a sensation is a brain process, I do not mean that the sensation is somehow continuous with the brain process. I mean instead that it is actually identical with. Okay, so the strict sense of identity. Now, why is it that he finds this to be such a plausible view, that the sensations are just equal to brain processes? In his mind, the situation would be very strange if consciousness and sensations were the only thing that is left out by a physical explanation of reality. He says, why would it be that we can come up with a physical explanation of everything else, all these other material processes in the universe, like we understand how stars form, or how volcanoes erupt, or why hurricanes occur, or why black holes exist. So we understand the physical basis for all of these facts. You know, laws of thermodynamics and physical laws. We seem to understand how these things work according to physical principles. So why would it be that the only one thing that science and physics can't comprehend is what's going on in your mind as a conscious being? He says it would not really be too elegant if the universe operated according to two distinct sets of laws. One set of laws that governs the behavior of physical matter and all the things that it interacts with, and then some other mysterious set of principles to describe how it is that the consciousness functions. So no, he says, science has made great progress, especially in the last couple hundred years, by being able to increasingly explain more and more of the world according to its ultimate physical and chemical constituents and mechanisms. So if consciousness was somehow left out of a full understanding of physics and science, then it would be what he terms a nomological dangler. So now I need to provide for you the definition of that concept. What is a nomological dangler? Okay, so this is a term he's now using. Nomological dangler, so what it really means is it's something that remains unexplained by physical science. Nomological dangler, something that remains or just is unexplained by the physical sciences. So the breakdown of the root meaning of this word nomological, nomos is from Greek, which means of law. So nomological dangler is basically something that is dangling free outside of our system of scientific understanding and scientific laws. So I don't know if this is a visual that helps you, but if you imagine that all of our scientific understanding and knowledge is like a self-contained sphere, like a sphere of knowledge and information, then something that we don't understand according to science is like something outside of that sphere that's just kind of floating out there, dangling free. We want to bring that into our scientific understanding, but as of now, it's not currently understood. So nomological danglers are, just to be repetitive, something that is not, as of yet, understood or comprehended by our best scientific theories. Now, question, okay, do you think that scientists, physicists, etc., do you think that they are like fans of nomological danglers or no? Does the scientist like for there to be nomological danglers or not like it? What do you think? Does a scientist like to have the concept of something that is not understood according to scientific principles? Just concede that there are such things? I don't know. What would be your guess? Yeah, so no, good. Science doesn't have a goal of just explaining most of the stuff about reality, but then leaving some things untouched and just unexplored. So science would be, right, incomplete and not fully successful at explaining things if it just left the whole aspect of consciousness outside of its scientific investigation. So he thinks, why should we say that science can only understand things that have nothing to do with consciousness, like all these unconscious physical processes in nature? Why leave it at that? I mean, it doesn't seem like there should be something different. The consciousness that we have exists in the physical universe, so shouldn't there just be one set of principles that can explain everything? So he's now trying to tell you that if dualism is true, right? If mind is not made out of matter, if consciousness is much more like the soul or the spirit, something that has no ultimate physical basis, then it would be a nomological dangler. It would be something that forever remains mysterious from the point of view of just physics and science. And so what he says is, I don't want to concede that consciousness is a nomological dangler. To the contrary, it's not. It's just another physical process. In fact, it's just a brain process. And therefore, since the brain is a physical thing and neurochemistry and neurology can be understood on physical and scientific principles, then that means there's really nothing that's not physical, including consciousness. It's not a nomological dangler, in other words. But if it was, that would be a problem, because a scientist does not like for there to be unexplained things in science. Okay, so his goal then in the paper is simply to convince the reader, you or me or anybody, that there are no philosophical arguments that compel us to be dualists. So he's trying to say that the best arguments that dualism can give still don't work. They still don't prove the case that dualism is true. And so he's basically going to try to defend the claim that sensations are brain processes against what he considers to be objections that dualists might make. Okay, so his thesis, sensations are brain processes. They're just physical brain processes. Now his next step is to try and provide objections to this claim that might be stated by dualists, and his goal is to sort of push back on those objections and show that they don't really defeat physicalism. Okay, so he numbers these different objections by number. He like objection 1, objection 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So there's 8 of them that are mentioned in the book. I didn't think that it was essential to go over all 8 because, to be honest, some of them are a little repetitive and some are more essential than others to getting his main idea. So I'm just going to kind of zoom around through what I thought were the most important of the objections and talk to you about his responses to them. Okay, so we go on now and we're going to talk about objection number 1. Okay, but just to be clear, I'll put this up here above so that we don't lose sight of it. These are all objections to the statement that is his thesis, that sensations equal brain processes. And if that is true, then physicalism is true. But now we're going to consider objections to that concept. So just so that you don't lose the plot and that you're clear about how this discussion is organized, it's a common place in philosophy for an author to state a position and to defend it against objections. So Smart, J.J.C. Smart, is the person who's arguing for physicalism, that sensations are just brain processes, nothing other than physical states of the brain. But to be thorough and to be, fully engaged with all the objections that could be made, he states the objections so that he can then state a response to them. Okay, so like point, counterpoint, and then reply. He says sensations are brain processes. Now we're going to hear some pushback, and then you'll see how he replies to the pushback. Okay, so these objections are not his views. These objections are his characterization of a critic's criticism of his view. Okay, so objection number 1. Objection number 1 says that a person can easily talk about their sensations, but has no idea what is going on in their brain. So therefore, the two things must not be the same. Okay, that's one objection. An ordinary person like me or you can easily talk about their sensations but cannot say what is happening in their brain. So the two things must not be the same, sensations and brain processes. Okay, so the objection here, and let me explain it. It says that any ordinary person can easily talk about the sensations that they experience in the sense defined earlier, a state of consciousness. But that same person who can, with no difficulty, describe or explain their experiences, their sensations, has no idea, not even the faintest idea of what is going on inside of the brain. So, for example, right now you could say, oh, I'm watching a lecture and it's boring, and that's the sensation. I just find it boring. I mean, I'm not saying it is boring, but perhaps someone felt that way. So the experience, the sensation is a sensation of boredom. You can talk about boredom. Oh, it was so dull. It was just going on and on. It seemed like it was taking forever. But, okay, what if somebody says, okay, well, the feeling of boredom is just a brain process. So tell me, please, what is the brain process? That's not so easy. You can't really give an account of that. A person can't just sit back and say, like, oh, okay, well, I was bored during a lecture. Or if you like, I can describe it as a brain process. So right at that moment, in the left frontal cortex, there was neurons firing in the ganglion area back here of the prefrontal lobe, and essentially that was how it felt while I watched the lecture. See, it's no way that you can convert sensation talk into brain talk. If you, I don't know, stub your toe on like a couch and it hurts, you could say, ouch, that really hurt. I'm in some pain. Now you're just explaining the sensation, and that's no problem. But if I was asking you to give a more detailed description of how that is equivalent to a state of your brain, you'd have nothing to say. It'd be impossible for you to say, okay, well, the sensation of the toe being in pain, that basically is because, or that's the same thing as nerve signals firing back here in the cortex of my brain in this specific area. And you could just look at a brain scan and see that. So all of us have sensations, and we talk about them all the time, whether we thought something was fun, unpleasant, painful, exciting, funny. Any of those sensations we all experience, and we talk about them with no degree of difficulty. But we just don't have any ability to say much of anything at all about the functions or the workings of the brain. Sort of like you drive a car and you know how it works, but you don't really know what's going on under the hood, or, I mean, some people do, but most of us couldn't give a very precise account of what's happening. So our objection is saying that the two things must not be the same. They must be two different things, because if they really were the same, then we should be able to talk about them with the same level of easiness. It should be just as easy to talk about brain processes as it is to describe the sensations. If they're the same thing, then shouldn't we be able to talk about the two ways of describing it with equivalent degree of ease? Now, you heard the objection, right? That I can talk about my sensations all day, but I couldn't even tell you one thing about what's going on in my brain. So these must not be at all the same. But he has a reply to that, okay? So here's his reply to that objection. So JJC Smart is basically saying, let me take the best shot from the dualist. Let me hear the objections they would give against the sensations as brain process position. And then I'll try to state what are my responses against those objections. So here's his pushback, his reply. He says, just because we can have two words for something does not necessarily mean that the two words refer to two different things. So it's possible to have two words for the same object. And in that case, there's really no problem with the fact that we can describe the sensations, but not the brain processes. So okay, sorry, one thing. Okay, so it says just because we have two words or descriptions for one thing does not necessarily mean that there must be two things that the words refer to. In other words, you can have two different descriptions of one object and it still just be one object. Okay, and there's an example that is given to illustrate this point. I write e.g. for example given, and the example that is given to put this point in more context is the morning star. Sorry, I'm kind of not having enough space there, so I'm going to have to create a little more room for that to note. An example of this, I'll just say it, okay? Example given, morning star and the evening star. So let me tell you a little story, true story. This was discussed by another late 19th, early 20th century German philosopher named Gottlob Frege. I'm a big fan of Frege. I actually published one article on Frege back in the day, but anyway, so here's a fact. You go back in time far enough, people used to look at, a lot of the night sky. I mean, we still do that, but of course in the big cities there's tons of light pollution. Anyway, before the era of electricity and everything, there was much more visibility to all the night sky. So there was a very bright star in the night sky, and it was the brightest one visible from the planet Earth. So people called it the evening star, all right? So just know that what is the evening star? It's the brightest star in the evening sky. Okay, now in the morning time, in the early dawn in the morning, when the light is still a little low because the sun is not fully out yet, there will still be some stars visible in the sky. And there was also a very bright star visible in the morning sky, so they labeled it the morning star. Okay, so just understand the evening star equals the brightest star in the evening sky. The morning star, brightest star in the morning sky. So let's suppose there are two different people. One is a person who stays up late and never is up in the morning. And they have an unlikely friendship with a really morning person that's always up early and doesn't stay up late. So one is the night owl and one is the early bird, right? Now, as time passed, a discovery was made. Interesting discovery was made about the morning and the evening star. What do you think that discovery was? People discovered or found out, proved that in fact, what? What do you think? Maybe you can put these pieces together and infer what this discovery about the morning and the evening star was. Okay, yes, they are actually the same star. Correct, Senna. In fact, it's even a little more funny than that. They aren't even a star. It's the planet Venus that sort of looks like a star under certain viewing conditions from the planet Earth. But anyway, so there was the same object, the same, let's say, star for the sake of discussion. But they didn't know that. For a long time, people thought there's one object, evening star, bright evening star, another object, morning star, bright morning star. So understand this. There's two labels now for one object. One of the labels is morning star, and the other is evening star. So we have two labels. Does that mean that they're not the same thing? Of course not. Just because we multiply the ways of referring to the one object does not make it somehow split into two and become more than one thing. Same with me, right? I could call myself Dr. Vulich, Professor Vulich, or I could call myself, a musician or an athlete or something, other things that I'm interested in or that I do on my free time. But to refer to Dr. Vulich, the teacher, or Richard Vulich, the avid runner, it seems like it's two different descriptions. That running is not necessarily related to teaching, but I'm not two people, right? That's just two different ways of referring to me. If I met somebody at a party wearing a costume and I introduced myself as like Joe, and then I see them later without the same costume and I say, hey, it's Richard, how are you? They might say, I met two great people at the party. These were interesting, different personalities. Joe, I talked to for a while, and then afterwards I met this guy Richard, and he was pretty cool. But look, those are two different names, descriptions, whatever, of one thing. So that's the point being made here. Take stock of the whole discussion. Mr. J.J.C. Smart says, sensations are brain processes. Those are not two different things. That's just one and the same. When you have a sensation, what's happening is your brain is in a particular state. Now, the objection says, no way, that can't be. They can't be the same, because if you really look at how people talk, they can talk about their sensations, no problem. But no one has any ability, even a neuroscientist doesn't really have a clear description of what the precise brain process is that is claimed to be identical to the sensation. So if I can talk about one but not the other, these must be two different things. Now the response from JJC Smart is, well, not so fast. I mean, yeah, there are two different labels, and there's two non-equivalent ways of describing something, but that does not necessarily mean that the two descriptions actually refer to two different objects or two different things. He gives another example to add to the whole morning star, evening star point. He refers to the concept of lightning and electricity. Okay, so what is lightning? Well, the more precise physical description of lightning is that it's an electrical discharge of ions in the Earth's atmosphere. So it's just basically electricity. That's what lightning is. People didn't always understand electricity, and some people still don't really understand it. But, you know, take a person that has no understanding whatsoever of what electricity even is. They could look at the lightning and be like, wow, big, pretty, you know, flash of light. And then you tell them what electricity is, and they're like, huh, I don't follow you. I don't understand that. But just because a person cannot understand the more precise scientific description of the observed lightning flash, that doesn't mean that it's not electricity. It still just is. And we could call it lightning or electricity, but it's really just one and the same thing. So I'll read to you his words now. He says, so first of all, he states the objection. It's very kind of blunt and bold statement. I don't know, it's funny wording. So he says here, in the voice of the critic, any illiterate peasant can talk perfectly well about his sensations, or how things look or feel to him, or about his aches and pains, and yet he may know nothing whatsoever about neurophysiology. A man may even believe that the brain is an organ for cooling the body, without any loss of ability to talk about his sensations. So therefore, the things we are talking about when we describe our sensations must not be processes of the brain. And now his response is stated. He says, well, you might as well say that a nation of lazy people who never saw the morning star or knew of its existence, or who had never thought of the expression morning star, but who used the expression evening star, could not use the expression to refer to the same object. You may object that the morning star is in a sense not the same thing as the evening star, but only something that is continuous with it in space and time. You may say that the morning star is not the evening star in the strict sense of identity that I distinguished earlier. He says, I can perhaps forestall the objection by considering the lazy people to be New Zealanders and the early risers to be Englishmen. Then the New Zealanders described as the morning star could be the same thing as described as the evening star. So yeah, the description that he gives is that suppose there was this lazy person, right? They never can get up early. So they sleep in all the time. But they have their friend that's the early morning, you know, early bird, and then never stays up late. Imagine they have a conversation where the early riser is like, hey, you need to get up a little earlier, my friend, sometime. I know you love to sleep in and stay up all night like a vampire, but you got to get up early one of these days because you're missing out on something beautiful. Have you ever heard of the morning star? It's great. And the evening guy's like, no, I've never heard of that, and I'm sorry, but I'm not going to watch it because I just need my rest, and I don't like being up in the morning. But you, on the other hand, also have an issue because you should stay up a little later one of these nights. You're missing some amazing things in the night sky. Have you heard of the evening star? Morning guy's like, no, I've not heard of the evening star, nor have I seen it because I'm just not that kind of person. I need to be in bed early. So it looks like they're talking about two different objects that neither one has seen the other. But of course, it's one and the same thing, and they just don't realize that the different labels are labels of the same object. So anyway, essentially, someone could argue that sensations are not brain processes because we just talk about them differently. When we speak about our sensations, we do so in the subjective language of the experience, the subject that has the experience. When we talk about a brain process, we talk about something more objective, like the brain is objectively in this particular physical state at that time. But what Smart is now saying is that don't be thrown by the fact that these look to be two different descriptions of two different things. It's oftentimes the case that where there are two different labels or descriptions, they actually are the same object. And sensations and brain processes is just another example of that, like the morning or the evening star, like lightning and electricity. Two words, but not two things. So language is perhaps misleading us into thinking that there are two separate existences here. But when you actually drill down and think about what they refer to, he argues they do refer to the same thing. Okay, so now if you understood this first objection and reply, that's like the kind of core of the whole paper. So I mean, that's like the most important one. Many of the other objections and replies circle around something or revolve around a point that's much similar to this. So that's why I spent the most time on this number one objection, but I'm going to talk about some of the others. I'm not going to talk about all 8 because, like I said before, I thought some were more critical than others, but I'll try and mention a few more. So here's just one and the reply. So let's talk about another. Okay. So objection 2 is kind of similar to number 1. Objection 2 says that the words sensation and brain process have different meanings. And since the words don't mean the same thing, since they have different definitions, then they must refer to different things and they must not be the same. Okay, so another objection, which takes a similar standpoint to the previous one. If you look at the word sensation and brain process, they seem to have different meanings. If like you were looking them up in the dictionary or just thinking of it in a common sense level of giving the definition, you would not give the same type of explanation. So they don't have the same meaning. They must not be the same thing. His reply is similar to the first. He just says, okay, well, 2 words can have different meanings, but still refer to the same object. And once again, he would direct us to the examples mentioned before. Morning star and evening star don't have the same definition. Morning star means brightest star seen in the morning sky. Evening star means brightest star visible in the evening sky. Those are not the same definition, but yet it is one and the same object. So once again, it seems like it's only language that is leading us towards the conclusion that there are 2 different things, but merely the invention of multiple labels or descriptions for one object does not necessarily suffice to prove that there's more than one thing that the words all refer to. So there can be words with different meanings that refer to the same thing. Okay, so like if I introduce myself to somebody as like a professor at a college, that's one term, that's one definition or meaning. And if I say to another person, oh, you know, I'm like an avid runner who competes in these races, those 2 descriptions don't have anything to do with each other, right? The definition runner, the meaning of the word runner is not the same as the meaning of the word teacher, but when there's a person who is both, then the 2 descriptions just refer to the same object. You know, we can do this in all kinds of ways. I can say a country that is directly to the north of Mexico and a country that is directly to the south of Canada. It looks as if these are 2 non-equivalent definitions, but of course they both just refer to the same landmass of the United States. So again, many of the objections seem to be pointing out that when we talk about sensations and brain processes, the language that we use and the meanings behind those descriptions seem to point towards different things. But in fact, as he would argue, there's really just one thing despite these linguistic differences. Okay. So now we're moving to the 3rd objection. Okay. So how about this one? I'm going to skip around a little to objection 4. Objection 4 mentions this, that the sensations that you have seem to have no actual physical location. There's no place where they are in space. So the sensation has no spatial location, but the brain process does, of course. And so that must mean they're not the same thing. Okay. To consider this new objection, I'm going to mention an example that the author talks about at various points in the article. So this is something that you would notice if you look back at the article. He's talked a couple times here about the sensation or experience of an after image. Now, I don't necessarily need to use that example to make his point, but I guess I will since he talks about it. So here's a phenomenon that has to do with vision that we've probably all experienced and noticed, even if it hasn't been perhaps discussed or pointed out. So like, have you ever noticed that if you look at a light source, you know, like the outline of a light bulb or something along those lines, if you look at such a thing and then you briefly close your eyes, like right now, a chandelier right above me with some lights. So if I look at it and then I close my eyes, and you can just do the same, not for too long, of course, I don't want you to hurt your vision, but if you look at a light source for just a brief moment, close your eyes then, do you notice that that faint after image in the outline of the light source remains imprinted on your closed field of vision? So like, you know, your field of vision is black, but you still see, like, for a moment anyway, the after image from the impact of the light on your retina. Do you understand what I'm saying? Can anybody relate to this? Just let me know so that it's not, I know it's not lost on you. Okay, good. So Eva, there's a case of one who knows what I mean. But I invite anybody else, if there's any confusion, to just quickly do that. Just quickly just glance at a light, close your eyes for a moment, and you'll see some, in my vision, it's like a purplish hue of a sort of after image in the faint outline of the light source. Okay, so question about the after image. When it's floating around in your field of vision, where is the after image at in space exactly? Can you tell me exactly where I will find this after image? It's kind of like the only answer that seems to be reasonable is it's nowhere. Because, okay, is it in the space around me? No. If you walk around, you're not going to see like the after image physically floating outside of me out in space. So it's not out there. But what if you look inside of me? Are you going to see the after image there? No. I mean, if you dissect me, you're not going to find any little after image floating around anywhere. You're just going to see a bunch of tissue and blood and other things like that, but you're never going to find the so-called after image. So it looks like this after image is literally just nowhere in terms of where it's at in space. But JJC Smart says that sensations are equal to brain processes. Now, a brain process certainly does have a physical location. And where is that located physically? Well, I mean, inside of the skull where the brain is at. It's the only possible place a brain process could be. So brain processes have a precise physical location. Sensations don't seem to, and that must mean some argue that they can't be the same thing at all. I went with his example of the after image, but you know, any other case I could mention would be fine. Imagine right now a memory of, I don't know, your mother, or maybe you're close by to her actually, but whatever the case is, if you just think of like a past memory, let's go with that, like from your earlier childhood, that scene in your mind's eye is nowhere to be found physically. I can't like see that scene projected outside of you like it was a film being shown, nor am I going to find the scene somehow physically inside of you either. So it looks like the memories, the mental pictures, the after images or whatever, all the sensations really under the sun, they just don't seem to have a physical position, but the brain process of course does. So those must not be the same thing. Once again though, his reply is a very similar type of reply given as before. He just says, the sensation is a brain process. And so in fact, the sensation does have a physical location. It's just located wherever the brain process is. It's just that we don't have a habit of talking that way because there wouldn't be no point to describing things that way in everyday conversation. But nonetheless, it's still true. So the sensation is a brain process so it is physically located where the brain process is in the brain. So it's only the effect of the way we talk that makes us consider the sensation to have no physical location. But the experience of the sensation is a brain process, and so therefore the experience that we do have is actually in space. It serves no purpose to talk about things that way. But if we want to be very precise in the literal facts about what's going on, then we would have to say that. So like, for example, when I say to you, oh, I had an amazing, I had a fun time going to the movies, it was like a really exciting, cool movie, and I enjoyed it, there'd be no point to me adding on to that statement by saying, and by the way, the enjoyment that I had is located right here in this part of the brain, and that's what was going on as I viewed the film. There would be no real reason to say that because it would just be an awkward and unnecessary piece of information to provide. But the author's saying that even though we don't have a habit of speaking that way, it's not literally untrue to point out that the sensations you experience are brain states and therefore they're physically located where the brain is. Okay, so let me just jump now to the sixth objection. There's just two more that I wanted to go into. Maybe we'll have to finish the last one at the top on Friday, but that'll be fine. It won't take very long. Objection number 6 just says that, kind of interesting, sensations are private, but brain processes could be publicly observed, and therefore they cannot be the same thing. Sensations are private, but brain process can be publicly observed, and therefore they must not be the same thing. Okay, so like if you're having a memory right now of your last birthday, the thing about that memory that you're right now having is that I don't have access to it and neither does anybody else. You're the only one who can right now form that memory that you experienced. I mean, if another person that you know was at the birthday party, then yeah, they could have a memory of the party, but it would not be your memory because they're a different subject, and so they would view it from their different position as a different subject. So sensations are they're private. They're locked away in your own cognitive domain, in your own psychology. So there's nothing I can do to somehow like look at your sensation like I'm watching a movie or something, like peer into the actual sensation or feel what you feel or see what you see when you think of things. But the brain process, though, can at least in principle be seen by a third-party observer. Like a brain process, we can do a brain scan and we can look at the various parts of the brain where there is more or less neural activity. So a brain process can be looked at and in fact is looked at sometimes when a person needs to have a brain scan for a medical or other reason. That can be looked at, but the sensation can't be seen. So I can look at your brain scan when you have a memory, but I'm just going to see the brain process. I'm not going to see the memory. So you can argue that that's a main difference that shows they can't be the same. The sensations are private to the subject. The brain process is susceptible to observation by others. So they must not be the same thing. Once again, though, I don't know if it's getting a bit repetitive, but I guess it kind of is. His reply is really just the same as many of the others been given before, which is that, once again, this is just a linguistic difference, but it's not corresponding to an actual physical difference. So does not prove there are two separate things. Okay, so the language that we use to talk about our sensations are the language of the private experience of the subject. The language that we use to talk about the brain process is the objective language of an observable process. But we should not be misled by language into thinking that there must be two different things just because they're not spoken of in the same way at all. He says here on page 589, this shows that the language of reporting my internal experiences has a different logic from the language of a material process. It's obvious that until the brain process theory is much improved, there will be no criteria for saying that Smith has an experience of such and such, except for the introspective report. So we've adopted a rule of language that leads us towards that conclusion. Okay, so anyways, that's about it for today's time. But we'll be back on Friday, and I'll just talk to you about the one last objection, objection 7, that I wanted to also quickly mention. Other than that, we're going to talk about Alan Turing on Friday. So do read his paper, Computing, Machinery, and Intelligence. And that'll be our last piece before we go away for our Thanksgiving holiday. But yeah, that's the plan. So have a great day, everybody, and take care. Stay safe and healthy. And I guess I'll just see you back in a few days. Do let me know if you have anything, any questions or anything by email. Okay then, bye-bye, take care.